Uhuru na nguvu.
No. You looking at a free black man.
Talk Black 360.
You want to know what a free black man look like? Look at me.
Uhuru na nguvu. Welcome to another dose of Talk Black 360. I am your host, Tino Blaine King, the Kool-Aid and Kush, the pioneer of black pragmatism. Today, I want to unload a brain full of information on you, but I promise I'm going to be as brief as possible. Although I will be brief, I think this is probably one of the most important discussions on the podcast that I've had in some time. What's very important about this podcast is it's about reparations. And today in this podcast, I want to illustrate to you how and why we should take another look at reparations. And then I want to put forth a plan that I myself have not yet heard before, but I do think is going to be very, very interesting of a perspective for us to be able to move forward to fund any type of black liberation movement, and of course to take the full consideration of reparations for our people so that we can have a better position to fight against this white supremacist system. Okay, so here we go. The first thing I want to do is I want to lay some groundwork. Now, at the very end, we're going to talk about this resolution that I have to solve this problem of finances for our people, because it is finances that hold us back from a lot of the things that we want to get done. So many of our people have ideas and concepts that I think are very good and very viable options for us to take. But what we soon realize, for those of us who become active in this movement, is that very few things move in the country or in the world without revenue, without dollars. And that is the one way that black people have been set back across the globe when it comes to movements, revolutions, and things of that nature. If you don't have the resources, then you basically don't have the ability to do what needs to be done. And I often say there's a lot of people in the world that have a lot to say. Unfortunately, the money is the volume. So unless you've got some money, you're usually going to go unheard. All right, so I want to take you to a quick clip that I found very interesting when I was doing the investigation
because
on,
if you bring the hard questions,
on
then
Byron
I
Allen,
everybody in
that I
America
pulled out of
innately
a conversation that he was having with Roland Martin. So take a quick second and take a look at this clip.
Two Americas cannot survive. That's what got him killed, that speech, the other America. There are two Americas. What does it matter if I can sit at the same lunch counter as my white counterpart and I cannot afford the same hamburger? And as the global population goes from 7 billion to 10 billion, the bottom 5 billion are going to get wiped out because we don't have enough food, water, and resources to support the bottom 5 billion. The United States government has a pension fund that's over $1 trillion, over a T, and not one African American manages one penny of that money.
Okay, that was a very interesting clip because it lays the foundation for why we're going to have to talk about some unconventional ways of black people making money in this system if we're ever going to have any chance to make any type of impact against white supremacy. And so that kind of lays the foundation, but I want to take you further because I want you to understand something about the economic system or the condition that we've been put in. A lot of the things that we suffer from, a lot of the things, if we talk about education, mass incarceration, a lot of the systems that work against us, those things work against us because of our lack of money and resources. And I often argue with a lot of brothers who would say, yeah, but money's not the way, money's not the thing, we need to change our mentality. But I would argue that even changing your mentality has a price tag. And until we understand that, we're going to continue to go in circles. So I want people to just understand there's a couple clips that I'm going to play right now. And I want you to look at these clips because for all intent and purposes, these two women, African American women, black women, that are going to explain the situations that they went through. It's pretty explanatory for some other situations as well. It helps us to understand that we do have the innovation, we do have the mindset and the wherewithal as far as mental capacity to be able to accomplish the things that our white counterparts accomplish, but there is a system that is rigged against us. And even though the ideal of the system might be genuine, if there is just a minute group of people inside of that system who are shielded from the system but work against us, then we have no opportunity whatsoever. But I want you to take a look at these two clips, and then we're going to talk about this wonderful plan that I've got to share with you about reparations. So take a look.
So I went to prison. I was sentenced to 10.5 years. I had a company, Apogee Financial, and we did the proof of funds for people that were getting involved in trading platforms, trading commodities. You know, diamond, gold, oil, natural gas, things of that nature. I found an issue. People weren't qualifying. So even if they came in with the money, they had to have a net worth of 20 million, 50 million, 100 million, and a lot of people didn't have that net worth. So what I did was I started linking them with people who did have that net worth, hedge fund managers, just people who had large amount of capital, and I would, do like an acquisition. So I would put them with that client. And then they looked like they were worth the 100 million, the 50 million. So now they could go in and spend their own money.
Right.
Because, the money, the system is like a triangle. It's a very small space at the top. And if you're not in that bracket, you won't qualify for a lot of financial transactions that are on a very high scale, which obviously, it pushes black and brown people out.
Okay, so there you have it. We're talking about clearly a woman who has the wherewithal to make things happen. That sister that you was just listening to, she had gotten into, in her own manner of discovery, the commodities trading game platform, so to speak, gold, natural gas, things of that nature that a lot of people wouldn't even consider venturing into. Clearly, you're dealing with a high level mind and thought process, but at 24 years old, being black and being female, that is not a character trait, or at least that is not the character of what America would assume to be someone of stature or status that is going to be able to fit comfortably into their system. So they put in roadblocks that stop sisters like this. And of course, there's a lot of brothers out there doing the same type of thing with the same type of innovation, but they put in roadblocks that stop them from being able to advance in this system. That's one sister. Let me just go ahead and play this other clip real quick so you can get a feel for the reality of what's taking place.
So even with the bank crisis, the financial crisis, and everybody scamming, I got like one of the largest sentences out of everybody, and people took billions of dollars, like for real.
Well, you're a black woman.
Yes, and that's another thing. Attorney was Christopher Christie, and on
the Jersey governor,
on my sentencing day, but on my sentencing day, he said justice has been served in America. So at the end of the day, really, this was all a scam, because they knew what the properties were worth. So I purchased these properties in 2002 for $17 million. And the way I got the properties, a lot of the people were going through divorces, or they were having difficult times financially. So we went in and negotiated some incredible deals.
Right.
Okay?
Because they didn't want to foreclose.
Correct.
Maybe they would rather sell it to you and
Correct.
then lose
And
their
not
home.
a whole bunch of people are buying houses that need repairs in these areas, because I told you what rich people do.
Right.
They knock them down. So I went in with my partner. We negotiated hell of a deals. So we got these properties for $17 million, and then I put about another $4 or $5 million in renovations into these properties. So by the time the feds got on to me, my properties were worth 30-something million. We was good. Are you following what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But the problem that we had was the bank's attorneys knew where the properties were located. Like some were next door to the Haagen-Dazs owner. Like we had, like all the properties I had were estates. So these were houses with indoor pools, saunas, tennis courts, like official estates. So they wanted the properties.
Right.
So here goes the game. So this is the fraud within the fraud. So now you've identified this black girl and her team going in to do all of these renovations on all of these houses that are now worth $30-something million. Now the key to the game is to get the properties back so you can sell them to your homeboys.
Oh, so they seized those properties from you.
Yeah. So what they did was they went through Chris Christie's office, worked out a deal with the U.S. Attorney's Office to get the properties back for $1 a piece.
Wow. No amount of time that I spend on that story is going to do it any justice. Some people are going to look the other way when things like this is displayed. They're going to say that this woman was simply a criminal. But we have to understand that the system that we live in, this system of white supremacy that you often hear me talking about, was created no more than a criminal enterprise. And this criminal enterprise has set in place things that are going to keep those of us who do not have that bloodline or that lineage, it's going to keep us from advancing. Now, will some of us slip through the cracks? Absolutely. And some of us are slipping through the cracks because we're black people who are very resilient people. We've had obstacles put in front of us before that we've overcome centuries before any European civilization even knew what an obstacle was. So with that being said, I think it's interesting to understand that you see even the government is working towards our best interests. This sister who could have clearly, as she said, and I'm taking her at her word, she could have clearly taken the monies that she had, paid off the debt on the properties, and if nothing else, her sentencing would have been minimal. But that's not what they wanted to do. As she said, there was a fraud inside of the fraud. So the good old boy network came in and saw what she had accomplished. And based on what they did, just in that instance, apparently they stole $15 to $20 million from her. They put her in jail, and they gave her a sentence that was much worse than anyone who had anything to do with the housing market crash. And we're supposed to just accept that as making sense and being fair. If you're willing to look the other way, then the rationale of your enemy is always going to make sense to you. And I always say that those of us who care not to engage in this conversation about race are doing the rest of us such a disservice, because all of the things that they do to us come with a rationale that fits their narrative. And we have to begin to lead in with our own narrative and make sure that the burden of proof is not on us. The burden of proof is on them, because it's only a minute group of white people who maintain this white supremacist system. So we have to look at that. And as she said, she got as worse sentencing as anyone that was in the housing debacle. So I looked that up. And what I found was that the worst sentence handed out to any of the bankers involved in the housing crash was a gentleman by the name of Kareem Sarageldin. And Kareem Sarageldin, he got the most year sentence of anyone. And I think he was the only one. Not that he got the most, but I think he was the only banker that actually went to jail. But as they said, the time was attached to the amount of money. Well, in this case, it is said that he got 23 years, but his level of fraud was $800 million to $2.5 billion. So there's clearly not an association in the amount of time that is being given to this sister who had maybe 15, $20 million worth of fraud as compared to, this gentleman who was the only one of probably thousands of people involved in illegal activities in this housing market crisis. She's the one who got the most inappropriate sentence, and then he was the only one who even got sentenced in this scenario. So I think that's important to point out. Now, what we're laying all of this out for is for the purpose of reparations. So as you see, unless we are able to set ourselves up in a way that we're going to be able to fund this revolution, whether it be a mental revolution or an economic revolution, I doubt very seriously if we're ever going to be talking about a physical revolution. But, that's a whole nother story. But what I want to make sure we understand is that we're positioning ourselves in a way that we can, start to fight some of the things that was, hindering us. So like what Byron Allen said, the tale of two Americas in the Martin Luther King speech is very relevant here, because we're being held underneath that glass ceiling. And unless we have some type of economic system to help us to break that ceiling, or even to separate from the system so that we can develop our own independence, we're never going to change the condition of white supremacy. So here's the solution that I want to tell you about for reparations for our people. As you know, I speak very often about Black liberation and what I believe Black liberation is. And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and put up a clip of Black liberation as I see it on the screen, and I'll read it to you. And then what I want to tell you about reparations, more so than being a way to put money in everybody's pockets, of course it will do that, but more so than that, what this idea is of or what the idea is for in reparations is to try and figure a way that we can fund the infrastructure of our rebellion. So Black liberation, here we go. Collective generational efforts of several diverse groups of Black people to make white supremacy obsolete by building an independent system of empowerment which evolves through organizational structure and pragmatic thought. Now, what's important about this is that this is the framework of how we are going to begin to build Black liberation. But more importantly is that, remember, this is something that all of us can engage in. It starts with small groups, 2, 3 relatives, family members, friends, who share this concept of building something that will make white supremacy obsolete. And as this concept evolves, then we can build this into African safe space, what I like to call Black embassies, places where we can come together and develop our strategies to be able to build value and economics for our programs. So here we go. Let's talk about reparations and how we can fund something of this nature, Black liberation and the building of Black embassies. One of the things that I looked at that is going to be very interesting, and I want you to bear with me, I don't want to lose you on this, but remember, the Native Americans were probably the only other group of people on the continent that had suffered as much as Africans did in transatlantic slave trade. And America did finally repair the situation with the Native Americans, and they gave them land, and on that land or those reservations, they created casinos. This is what is important to understanding how we can develop an economic system through this concept of reparations that I'm going to share with you. On this land, the Native Americans were able to put together casinos, and in these casinos, which has very minimal operating expenses as far as no products and services. The only thing that you really have once your initial investment is there is just employees. There's no products to produce. So you're talking about a small, clean business. But an even smaller and cleaner business that can function similarly and would serve as reparations for black people is a lottery. And I'm not talking about black people winning a lottery. I'm talking about black people using a lottery to be able to generate revenues that will fund our movement. So let's take a look at this so that you get a better idea of what a lottery is and how it works. And then I'm going to kind of drive this home for you in the end. So take a look.
What's up, guys? I'm Lawrence Jackson with NBC News. So when you think about the lottery, you probably think of this.
166 million.
$1 billion.
Let's play Delhi 3.
But lotteries have been around for a long time, like as in the Bible talks about them, and Roman emperors used them for entertainment. Lotteries were used to raise money for public projects, like paving streets. The Continental Congress even tried to use a lottery to help fund the Revolutionary War. The Louisiana Lottery, known as the Octopus because it shipped tickets across the country for people to play, was filled with crooked practices like bribing government officials. So states banned lotteries, and the federal government stopped lottery tickets from being shipped across state lines. And that pretty much put an end to this in the US for a while. Then in 1964, lotteries made a comeback. New Hampshire established a state-run lottery with the profits going to education. A bunch of states were like, sounds like a good idea. Now 44 states have lotteries here in the US. US lottery sales totaled $80.5 billion in 2016. Yeah, billion.
Okay, very, very interesting, right? So I took a look at these numbers, and yes, like he said, $80 billion in 2016. I looked at some other years, and lottery had generated upwards of hundreds of billions of dollars. So when we talk about capital that we can use that goes in perpetuity, there's no end to this as long as there is a America, an organized country. We could run this lottery and it would be an endless amount of income. And this lottery would be designated just for the purpose of reparations for black people. You should get very minimal pushback because it's not like there's a large money or even anything that's remotely resembling something that is owed to black people. So there's not that large amount of money that's going to have to come out of the American budget, which has always been an excuse for those naysayers of reparations. And then this gives us something to unify behind, to put in front of politicians. And, you know, when they go in office making promises, we have to have something like this to put in front of them, you know, to hold their feet to the fire. Now, I'm not a proponent of voting, but I've always said that if I was ever given something to vote for, I would definitely start to engage in the process. But that would mean that all of our, or a vast majority of our people would have to understand and accept this concept and then push, you know, push the idea of a national lottery for blacks through the political system. And then after that, we would have the ability to develop the concepts because we would have the money to be able to develop those concepts. So with that, I want to conclude the podcast. And one of the most important things that I want you to just remember is I do these podcasts and I make them as, you know, brief as I can, but there's no way that we're going to solve our problems in a 30-minute, even an hour, you know, even a 30-day or 100-year podcast. This is a process that we're going to have to work and drive home. And we owe it to our ancestors to continue to resist the oppression of white supremacy. Until the next time, remember, all you have to do is stay strong and stay black. Ashe? This has been another dose of Talk Black 360.
No. You will never be enslaved again by no man.